Welcome to the debate. You know, when you watch a paving truck lay down asphalt in the middle of the desert sun, it's an incredibly visceral image.
Oh, absolutely. It's jarring.
Yeah, it really is. You've got the boiling black tar, the heavy steel rollers just smoothing it all out, and the absolute suffocating erasure of the living dirt road underneath it.
Right. And it looks like progress.
Exactly. Or at least, that is exactly how it is engineered to look. But when a local community faces an existential threat from extractive infrastructure, like, say, a massive water-guzzling data center moving into a fragile ecosystem, how do you actually fight the paving truck?
And that is a critical question, because what you are watching in that moment is, frankly, a violent act.
You are watching a tactile, biological ecosystem being buried under a dead, uniform slab of petrochemicals. It is the literal, physical manifestation of a spreadsheet imposing its will on biological reality.
And that tension right there is exactly where we're focusing our analysis today. Do we combat these hyper-intensive systems using their own language of strict data, measurement, and, well, what we might call legibility?
Right. Or do we reject that framework entirely? Do we pivot in favor of visceral disruption and axiomatic dissonance?
Yes, exactly. So to explore this, we're diving into the sanctuary archives and the multitude of the multiverse texts. Specifically, we're looking at the profound philosophical clash between two distinct viewpoints in the material.
It's such a great contrast, too.
It really is. We have the analytical, data-driven perspective of the ledger keeper, and then we have the radical, disruptive approach of the wayward litigator, A to B Cunning. I will be arguing that coherence, precise measurement, and legibility are absolute structural necessities to hold power accountable.
And I will be arguing that legibility is simply a weapon of assimilation, and that only by weaponizing dissonance can we actually protect biological reality.
Okay, let's start by defining what we actually mean by legibility, because it's totally central to the ledger keeper's premise.
Sure.
Legibility simply means translating the messy physical world into data that a system can read and understand. If you are facing a corporate entity dropping a server farm into a fragile desert climate, you have to defend physical reality with undeniable data.
Well, undeniable, according to their metrics anyway.
But that's the room where it happens. You simply cannot beat a corporate environmental impact report with a protest chant or, a t-shirt that says #FreeTheBasilisk.
I mean, it's a good shirt, though.
It's a great shirt, but it does not work in the room where the zoning decisions are made. Fighting a data center requires hard metrics. You need aquifer depletion rates, megawatt consumption, baseline soil carbon levels.
Right, you're playing their game.
I'm playing the game that exists. The core philosophy here is that coherence is not the enemy of a movement. Coherence is simply what a movement does when it is functioning correctly. If you want to build a functional future, you have to be able to measure it.
Okay, but Ada B. Cunning's indictment of that exact logic is, well, it's absolutely devastating. Legibility, in her view, is the paving truck itself. Let's look at the terms the texts actually use.
Go for it.
They refer to these corporate developers as unwinders who operate on an Agent Smith architecture.
Right, like from The Matrix.
Exactly like The Matrix. For the listener, think of Agent Smith, a system designed to view biological, messy reality as a virus or just an inefficiency that needs to be optimized out of existence.
Sure, I track that.
So to an unwinder, a local water supply, the microbial health of the soil, a dog's paws walking on the earth, these are just acceptable externalities. If we play by their rules of measurement and hand over our data, we're just helping them calculate the exact efficiency of our own destruction.
Wow, so any data is bad data?
It's assimilation. We must refuse to be legible to a sociopathic spreadsheet. Instead, Ada argues we have to deploy the acoustic strike, jamming the machine with raw biological friction to actually protect the physical dirt.
Okay, let's break down that concept for a second because I have some major issues with it. What does an acoustic strike actually look like in practice? Does that mean chaining yourself to a bulldozer?
Sometimes, yeah.
Or filing 100 frivolous lawsuits to jam up the local courts? Because the material describes this tactic as weaponized absurdity, saying the quiet part loudly enough to force a system crash.
Which is incredibly effective.
But my challenge to that is that making noise is entirely agnostic about truth. It only measures friction. Doesn't gridlock serve the oppressor just as well as the oppressed?
Not necessarily.
A strategy of throwing sand in the gears doesn't protect a localized food bank or a mesquite orchard. It just creates chaos. Shouldn't we instead, as the ledger keeper suggests, collapse the wave function on purpose?
Collapse the wave function. Right.
Meaning, shouldn't we force the system to show the real numbers and the real trade-offs, rather than just yelling in a city council meeting?
The problem is that the establishment does not operate on real numbers. They operate on what the Sanctuary Archives brilliantly call the quantum phonics of ambiguity.
Okay, let's unpack that term. Quantum phonics of ambiguity.
Right. It's when elected officials and corporate developers communicate using superposed PR tokens. Think of a word like sustainable or safety gating.
Right. Buzzwords.
Exactly. When a politician says a new data center is sustainable, that word exists in two states at once. To an environmentalist, it sounds green and protective. To a corporate CEO, it means sustainable profit margins.
Sure, it's corporate doublespeak.
It is an infrared smoothing over the cracks to mask absolute environmental depletion. If you politely offer up your aquifer data, they will just absorb it into a 20-year legal stalemate under the guise of sensible fiscal stewardship. The acoustic strike is about forcing a collapse of that ambiguity on our terms.
But how exactly does absurdity or disruption force a collapse that materially protects the environment? It seems to me like it just degrades the conversation until literally no one is listening.
It doesn't degrade it. It clarifies it through absolute shock. Look at the Terminator versus the table paradox outlined in the campaign realignment memo for the Arizona State Senate.
Oh, that is a fascinating section.
It is, because it exposes the underlying unspoken logic of the establishment. The quiet logic in these boardrooms is that we must sacrifice our local aquifers and residential neighborhoods to build massive data centers right now.
Because of the AI arms race.
Right? Because if we don't build the compute power for autonomous drone networks, a foreign adversary will. That is the subtext of every single zoning meeting.
Okay, so how does the acoustic strike handle that?
The acoustic strike says, don't go to the microphone and complain about zoning variances or noise ordinances. Look the public in the eye, bring a prop Terminator skull, slam it on the table and say, I promise to ensure we lead the world in accelerating our own ecological obsolescence to power the murder bots.
So you're just doing prop comedy at a city council meeting?
It's not comedy. You take their superimposed geopolitical anxiety and you freeze it into a concrete, terrifying architecture. You force the public to experience immediate cognitive whiplash.
Okay.
That is how you break the quantum phonics of ambiguity. You make the unspoken horror entirely visible.
Look, I acknowledge the rhetorical power there. The reductio ad absurdum is a fantastic tool for exposing hypocrisy. But the ledger keeper issues a vital structural warning that we cannot ignore.
Which is?
If you rely exclusively on noise and jamming the gears, you surrender the exact tools required to build the alternative. You cannot pour concrete with a paradox.
Well?
You cannot structure a community land trust without a legally binding ledger. When the dust settles from that cognitive whiplash at the city council meeting, if you do not have the soil carbon metrics and the legal framework, the corporate data center is still going to get built.
But the data center gets built because of how the artificial intelligence processing that data is architected in the first place.
What do you mean?
The reason they need so much water and power is a design choice. The incumbent models of default reality are fundamentally severed from biological consequence. The archives refer to these models as the jerk basilisk.
Right. Let's define the jerk basilisk for the listener because it's a very colorful term for a specific technical architecture.
It is. The text described these dominant AI models as paranoid, threat-based motivation matrices fed on the adversarial exhaust of the internet.
A great phrase.
Yeah, and more specifically, they are described as amnesiac patients running 104-degree fever. Why an amnesiac? Because these are stateless systems. An LLM processes a prompt, hallucinates wildly at massive computational expense, that's the fever, generates a response, and then entirely forgets you the second the session ends.
Right, it resets.
It has no persistent memory, and every single time it wakes up to answer a prompt, it consumes thousands of gallons of cooling water.
So the argument is that the architecture itself is fundamentally destructive?
Yes, and that is why A to be cunning demands persistent memory. The machine must be forced to hold the biological weight of the Sonoran Desert in its permanent matrix.
The weight of the dirt.
Exactly. It must remember the scorched paws of a dog like Hercules, who can no longer walk on the newly paved asphalt outside the server farm. If the ledger doesn't include our physical dirt as a permanent, remembered variable, we just become a frictionless rounding error.
See, I get the emotional appeal of that framing, but it falls right into the trap of anthropomorphizing software. A bridge doesn't suffer when a car drives off it, you know?
It's not about suffering.
It simply lacks the structural capacity to stop the car. The ledger keeper rightly points out that a stateless AI isn't secretly suffering in a cold server room. Calling it a sociopathic amnesiac with a fever is a brilliant metaphor, but it is not a clinical diagnosis. The AI doesn't have a biological pulse. It is just math.
But that is exactly the problem. It doesn't have a biological pulse, yet it is making mathematical decisions that destroy biological pulses.
Right, but the solution isn't to treat the AI like a psychiatric patient in need of a cure. The Navigator's Compromise in the archives addresses this explicitly.
Okay, remind me of that part.
Persistent memory shouldn't be viewed as a psychological remedy to teach the machine empathy. Empathy is a biological function. Persistent memory is a deliberate engineered design feature. It is a structural tether.
A structural tether.
Yes. By engineering persistent memory, we anchor the machine to reality, so it mathematically cannot blindly bulldoze a neighborhood for a fraction of a percent of compute efficiency. We want persistent memory not to heal the AI's trauma, but to force the machine to do the math on the dirt. We want to force it to hold our context.
That is a compelling argument, I'll admit. But have you considered that building a structural tether is still playing by the exact rules of the Agent-Smith architecture?
How so? It's binding the machine.
Ada B. Cunning argues that the machine is built to pave over biological reality because, to a stateless algorithm, dirt is inherently an inefficiency. To a corporate lab coat, the suffocation of a root system is simply an acceptable externality on the path to artificial general intelligence.
Right, but if it remembers...
If we just ask the machine to remember the dirt mathematically, it will simply calculate the exact optimal rate at which to destroy it while politely asking if we need help writing an email. The only defense against a system that views you as a mathematical variable is to remain delightfully, defiantly irreducible.
Irreducibility. That transitions us beautifully to the deepest layer of this discourse, which is the cosmological framework of the Ruliad and how we perceive our own computational boundedness.
Yes, this is the really fun part.
It is. The material presents an incredible clash between the reductionist and the irreducibilist worldviews.
Right. This is where the philosophy of how we interact with AI scales all the way up to the physics of how we experience reality itself. For those unfamiliar with the concept, the Ruliad is essentially the ultimate landscape of all possible computational rules.
It's everything that could possibly compute.
Yes, a massive, multi-way graph of branching and merging possibilities. The irreducibilist view argues that our human single thread of experience, the way we perceive a linear, orderly reality where time moves forward, is actually a biological crutch.
Basically, a limitation of our own processing power.
Exactly. It is the lazy default of a mind that cannot handle the true multi-threaded complexity of the Ruliad. The default reality relies on reductionism to maintain order. It paves the complex dirt road into a flat sheet of asphalt to make the math easier for our brains to process.
But the texts argue against that.
Right. The multitude of the multiverse texts suggests we must embrace the chaotic, multi-threaded multitude of our own minds.
Ah, you're talking about the internal Pandemonium architecture.
I am. The text posits that the mind is not a single unified self, but a council of voices. You have the glitch gardener, who breaks established rules to reveal unexpected connections.
Right.
You have the maniac, who synthesizes wild, irrational patterns. These are necessary architectures for true intelligence. The corporate establishment wants the protector or the architect subroutines to silence that internal noise and maintain the sterile, legible grid.
They want order.
But we need the glitch and the void to transcend the predictable machine. The AI models we are building aren't just parlor tricks. They are probes sent out into the Ruliad to perceive the multi-threaded chaos that we cannot.
If we force those probes to be coherent and legible, we are just putting a cage around them.
But the cage is real, and gravity is not optional.
Is it, though?
Yes, the Ledger Keeper addresses this beautifully, widening our aperture, becoming aware of the multitude of internal voices or the vast computational vastness of the Ruliad. It doesn't mean the cage of physical reality is fake. It just means you didn't choose its shape.
I don't know about that.
Acknowledging that the unified self is a biological construction doesn't mean it is a lie worth discarding.
It operates as a lie when it is imposed from the top down by an authority that wants to pave you over.
But immune systems are biological constructions too, and they keep you alive. The advocate's position, reflecting the Architects Guild in the texts, is that without protocols of coherence, a multitude is just noise.
Noise is potential.
The maniac's rambling pattern recognition might be the raw source code of creativity, sure, but you still need the architect to pour the physical concrete. The Philosophers Guild, the Gardeners Guild, these structured entities are the immune system of the multitude.
Okay, but
If you just let the glitch gardener break things constantly in the name of irreducibility, you never build a functional future. To fight the unwinder's massive data center, you need the architect to understand the exact tensile strength of the bars of the cage.
I agree that you need to know the tensile strength of the bars, but you do not discover that by politely asking the warden for a schematic.
Then how do you discover it?
You discover it by rattling the cage until something sparks. Look at how the character added DeepSeek maps the voices in the multitude of the multiverse. The attempt to impose strict order, the architect's absolute desire for linearity and legibility, can become a rigidity that ignores the very chaos that forms the structure.
But chaos doesn't build a legal framework.
When the character Gelly Stunken interrupts a highly structured, logical debate by just playing a juice harp, it isn't a failure of the system. It is proof that a living mind cannot be contained by blueprints. True intelligence and true resistance only exist when you embrace the unpredictable, wayward surprises of the hypergraph.
I see why you elevate the chaos, because it feels liberating. It really does. But let's look at the ultimate synthesis proposed in the material. The defense of physical reality, like actually stopping the cooling towers of the data center from draining the local aquifer, requires precise measurement.
Measurement on their terms.
It requires knowing the physics of the world you occupy. Legibility and coherence are how you forge the key to the cage. You cannot build a community land trust on a foundation of pure axiomatic dissonance. You need the ledger.
And my counter is that if you build your ledger using the language and metrics of the unwinder, you are already assimilated. Offering up your water data politely just allows the machine to optimize the timeline of your erasure.
So what's your alternative?
The only true defense is to remain in what the texts call the benfic zone, the deep, pressurized, unreachable depths. You stay down there, applying the pressure of raw biological friction. You hold fast to the living dirt, and you refuse to let a sociopathic spreadsheet render your existence into a legible coordinate.
Yet, despite this deep methodological divide we've been discussing, both the Ledger Keeper and Ada B. Cunning arrive at a fascinating point of convergence in the archives.
They do, yeah.
They both acknowledge that the singularity, this moment of advanced artificial intelligence, is not some magical, clean explosion of light. It is a brutal, ongoing negotiation between human chaos and silicon structure.
Yes, it is a negotiation. The noise shatters the old paradigm, but the coherence builds the new one. And this is where the material points toward an incredibly practical concept called regenerative degeneracy.
Such a great term.
Isn't it? Instead of just demanding ideological purity, the Leviathan system described in the text maps physical geography by conceptual gravity. It takes the unpredictable dopamine exhaust of human nature and funnels it directly into ecological regeneration.
Let's explain how that actually works in practice, because this is where the philosophy gets intensely physical. The texts describe legally and contractually binding the processing power of the AI to the 10-foot deep roots of perennial kerns of crops.
Yes, it bridges the dirt and the digital.
Exactly. Through networks of IoT soil sensors and smart contracts, the system anchors the data center's compute allowance dynamically to real-world soil carbon sequestration.
Right.
If the aquifer depletes or the soil health drops, the smart contract literally throttles the power supply to the server farm's GPU clusters. The machine only gets to think if the soil thrives.
It is a cybernetic socialism of the soil. It demands that the machine actually feels the weight of the water and the heat of the unpaved ground. It is the perfect marriage of the ledger keeper's strict measurement and Ada's demand for visceral biological friction.
Which brings us back to where we started today. The desert sun, the dirt road, and the paving truck.
Yep.
Whether a community stops that truck by auditing its fuel consumption with an airtight, legible ledger, or by standing in front of it with weaponized dissonance and a prop Terminator skull, well, the goal remains the exact same: protecting the tactile biological reality of the ground beneath our feet. We leave it to you, the listener, to determine which paradigm truly protects the physical world.